We are just about at the Founders Memorial, which is a wonderful monument in some respects and a problematic monument in other respects. It is one of the most popular spaces for tourists to have their picture taken. I can't tell you how many parents and children have stood here and had their picture taken against what I think is a really successful architectural design space with two openings coming into the park from either side, and the stairs, and what used to be a fountain, which is no longer a fountain. It was created in 1930 to celebrate the founding of Boston in 1630. And it is John Winthrop being greeted by William Blackstone, who lived on these 50 acres and owned these 50 acres and was alone on the Shawmut Peninsula as a white man. The thing that strikes us and we want to interrogate when we look at our monuments is the two Native Americans on the left-hand side. And I was talking to the vice president of the Massachusetts tribe recently, and he said that if it was the story that should have been, it would be Winthrop being received by the Sakem Chickasaw of the Massachusetts tribe, being given permission to occupy or to come to the Shawmut Peninsula, not all these white people, you know.
Right, and I was immediately struck by this when I walked up today to see the two Native Americans on the left, right?
Yeah,
this kind of kneeling down with the necklace. And then that is really, though, a narrative that is not about the indigenous peoples in Massachusetts. It's a narrative about the white settler. And I think it's interesting, like if you look at the ship, like across the water there, we already see structures. Like we already see the encroachment, right, of this kind of this force to transform the land into something else. But there's also really interesting depictions of women in here. If you look at the right with the soldier in full armor with his pike, and the woman kind of standing. I'm not quite sure what the purpose of the woman with the child, like that kind of balance between the two figures that's going on there. It feels very 1930s. It's
very 1930s, absolutely. 1930s. And when it was unveiled, the media reports talked about the happy Indians off on the left-hand side. So we know they weren't happy, whether they were, curious or whether they were whatever they were. It's a myth. It's a white myth.
And in the very beginning of the WPA, and with once they start to, the Treasury Department starts to fund the mural programs, there's all of these kind of idealized notion of Native Americans get reproduced in mural painting, but also in sculpture, right, on buildings. So I'm not surprised by this vocabulary, but it doesn't. Today, there's other kinds of stories that we can tell about this land.
Other stories to tell, but also how do we have a dialogue with this? Because it's a very popular monument. So, part of our monument task force, I want this to be one of the early things that we look at, and I want to, convene a group of people and not, decide what the goals need to be for this task force, but have people have a conversation about what do we want to accomplish, and how do we want to respond to something, for instance, about the Founders Monument. Certainly a sign could do something, and then what if, and this is one of many ideas that would come out of this conversation, a Native American artist created a response, created a dialogue with this and said, well, this is actually not what it was meant to be, and this is not what actually was the reality. This was the reality. So I'm looking forward to seeing the many ways in a dynamic, possibly temporary art form that we could shine a light on it. And not to sort of denigrate it and say we need to remove it, but we just need to help people look at it. Again, going back to the Shaw 54th Memorial, how do we help people see the full story?
That's right, and I think that this platform is like ripe for a performance.
Don't you think?
Yes, as an intervention, with perhaps an indigenous artist or another Boston artist kind of engaging it. But also like the stories we tell, right? So right off the bat, that this is not the historical story, that this is kind of a made-up story that we're realizing here with the grading of two Massachusetts citizens, and that there's something else, or Massachusetts colonial settlers. There's something else going on.
That's right. That's right. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for interpretation and a larger awareness.
And I'm just intrigued about why this memorial, of all the things you could choose to take a picture of yourself in front of, this idea of kind of the founding of Boston, but maybe it's proof that they've come to Boston and saw this core thing.
Well, there's partly, sort of the myth of Boston too. And it was founded here, and it was the cradle of freedom. And I mean, I know we debate about whether it's us or Philadelphia that has that has that moniker, but people, have a lot of projections about what Boston is and what it is in the identity of the country. I think that they do see it that way.
Well, and you see the figure with the Holy Bible. I mean, that's another thing to talk about, this kind of indigenous practices as opposed to Christian practice that we see, and this the Holy Bible used in this instance as kind of justification for colonialism and for settling. I think for or settler colonialism, as they're calling it, but I think that's really important. Like that link to religion is so, with the idea of the Puritan and the hat and the Bible landing ashore to basically enlighten these Native Americans.
That's right. That's really
problematic. Like introduce this Western religious form.
And we've come so far in just this last year, actually, since George Floyd was killed. I think we've really opened our minds to so many things that we have not been looking at. At least some of us have not been looking at. Others have been looking at it, and many people felt the Indians just didn't exist anymore. The Native Americans weren't around. Meanwhile, there's a very vibrant tribal culture, many cultures, many tribes in Massachusetts and in the country. So, you know, we need to be listening to them first before we talk about them, you know, and really understanding, you know, when you talk about the Bible and what the Bible says about humans and humans' relationship to nature, the Native Americans really understand. Now we're, you know, we're facing devastation of climate change and environmental degradation. Understanding that we have this reciprocal relationship to nature and we need to honor the gift that it gives us and, you know, be gentle with it. I mean, I think that we're all struggling to try to understand and bring into our own consciousness and our own actions what the Native peoples understood for millennia on this land.
Well, and I think what's also implicit about this image, even though it's a very clean image, minus the man in full armor on the right, is the implicit violence. And that's not something that one would look and immediately say, oh, there's violence, but that's what we know the result of this encounter will be, is that long-term violence and
ultimately
loss of
there will be. That's right.
And decimations of
trauma.
indigenous groups and trauma.
So it's a rich and problematic thing that we want to actually, this is a priority for us because of that. And I love that we're going to be, you know, embarking on that and bringing Native American voices and African American voices and people that think about sculpture, and we'd love to have you now and then give us your feedback and insights into what we're coming up with, because you have a wonderful mind for all of this, and we're really so thankful that you're still with us and we still have a relationship with us.
And it's been great, actually, over the last, I was trying to explain to someone recently, they're like, what's your connection to Boston? I'm like, I don't have a connection to Boston other than the Boston, you know, the public garden, and really talking about monuments and that initial conversation. You know, in the context of George Floyd, it's really important that we start to have a different ways of thinking about who we're honoring and why we're honoring, and to give deep thought to how this process works.
Really honor that process and be open and vulnerable to the things that we've done wrong and the things that we can correct.
And how hard it's going to be, right?
It's going to be hard, but I think we have to be committed to the work.
Yeah, exactly.
So thank you so much for being part of it.
You're welcome.